screenshot of the toolbar here, you'll see how questions will be displayed and how answers will appear. Note that I record this image on a Mac, so your interface may look slightly different, but the function and layout should be the same. Your questions can be technical if you're experiencing problems with the software, or content questions about what is being discussed. If you prefer, you may also email my coworker Kayla Mallon, whose email address is mallonk@si.edu. That's MALLONK@si.edu. We really would like a high-level participant involvement with this webinar, so please do ask questions as they come to you. Now it's my pleasure to introduce tonight's presenters, Dr. Jayme Linton and Dr. David Stegall. Dr. Jayme Linton is an assistant professor of education at Lenoir-Rhyne University in Hickory, North Carolina. Jayme developed and coordinates Lenoir-Rhyne's graduate program in online teaching and instructional design. She received her PhD in teacher education from the University of North Carolina at Greensboro in 2014. Jayme received a bachelor's degree in elementary education from Western Carolina University and a master's degree in curriculum and instruction from Appalachian State University. Previously, she held positions as instructional technology facilitator, staff development coordinator, instructional coach, and elementary teacher. Her research and professional learning focus on preparation and support for online instructors, online and blended learning communities for educators, blended learning in K-12, personal learning networks for pre-service teachers, and professional learning for technology integration. Dr. David Stegall is the superintendent for Newton Conover City Schools. He previously served the district as the associate superintendent as well as the director of elementary curriculum, ESL, and AIG. Prior to joining NCCS, he served in the roles of principal, assistant principal, and teacher at various schools in the Iredell, Statesville schools and Rowan, Salisbury schools. Dr. Stegall received a bachelor's degree in elementary education from the University of North Carolina at Charlotte, a master's degree in education from Gardner-Webb University, an education specialist degree in education administration from Appalachian State University, and a doctorate degree in educational leadership from ASU. Both Dr. Linton and Dr. Stegall have received numerous accolades at the local, regional, national, and even international levels. So without further ado, Dr. Jayme Linton and Dr. David Stegall.
Hi, Kyle. Thanks so much for having us this evening. Can you hear us okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. Like Kyle mentioned, I'm Jayme Linton.
And I'm David Stegall.
And we're really excited to be part of tonight's webinar about administrative support for professional learning communities. Well, we're both going to speak from experience and talk about what's worked for us and what hasn't, and share what we learned through our journeys with professional learning communities. So I want to start by speaking from my own experience. I know that most of you in attendance tonight are PLC leaders, so your main role is working with teacher groups in professional learning communities. And my guess would be that you've experienced some resistance along the way. In my former role as an instructional coach, my main role was also facilitating the PLC process. And in my first 2 years in that role, I experienced a lot of resistance from teachers I worked with, and even some resistance from my building level administrator. My principal was not 100% supportive of the PLC process and my role in that process. A couple of examples I can share, and I'm sure you have your own stories to tell. As a new instructional coach at a school with teachers who didn't know me, they didn't trust me, they didn't know what kind of teacher I was. It took time to build that trust, and especially with the principal who wasn't 100% supportive, that it just takes time to build that. I'd like to share some ways that I went about building trust and getting buy-in from teachers. One thing that I attempted to do through PLCs was to implement a daily intervention time. So one thing we were not doing as a school was creating opportunities to focus on individual students' needs through small group enrichment and intervention. Other schools in our district and in the area were doing that, and that was one area I saw for improvement for our school. So I designed the daily intervention plan. I presented it to my administrator, And she was sort of lukewarm about it, but said, sure, you can go ahead and move forward with this. And so I put together a presentation, a way I could share it with staff at the opening staff meeting, back to school. And right before I get my opportunity to stand up and talk about this exciting new opportunity, my principal stood up and said, well, we're going to start this new daily intervention time. I'm really not excited about it, but Jayme's going to tell you about it. Here she is. And so then I get to stand up and tell the teachers about what their role is going to be in the intervention process. And that was just one of the many cases where I felt like I was running into a brick wall with some of the initiatives I wanted to try. And through PLCs, there were other instances where I really wanted to take what we were doing in our learning communities to the next level. And teachers were not excited about it. In some cases, they would go complain to the principal about what they were asked to do in PLCs, and the principal would call me and say, okay, we need to back off on this. The teachers aren't ready. And so I had multiple times where I just felt like I wasn't making forward progress. It was really difficult. But for me, in those first 2 years as a school, we saw a lot of growth. And I'm going to speak to that in just a moment. But I'll say the three things I learned the most at that time through the resistance I experienced from my teachers and from my administrator. The first is that you cannot wait for everyone to buy in. So if you have teachers who are not on board with professional learning communities, even if you have an administrator who's not on board, you can't sit and wait for them all to be in agreement on what it is that you need to do in order to move forward. If you wait for everyone to buy in, you're never going to make change. You're never going to make forward progress. Sometimes you just have to move forward and the buy-in will come later, and you have to trust that if you're doing what's best for students, that's going to happen eventually. Sitting around waiting for buy-in is not going to be the way to move forward. So if you know what needs to happen in your school with implementing this curriculum, and you know what's best, and you know what would be the best direction for your PLC process, you need to start making forward progress, and the buy-in will come later. So I would encourage you to persist and move forward. Find those teacher leaders in your building, the ones who are, I like to call them first penguins, the ones who are willing to jump in the water even when they don't know what's waiting for them under there. Find those and make those teacher leaders be your allies, and move forward with those folks. And in the meantime, other people will see the awesome things that are happening with those teachers, and eventually they're going to want to be a part of what's happening. But if you wait for the entire staff to get on board, you're just going to be waiting a very long time, and there will be a lot of missed opportunities for student achievement, for teacher improvement, and for school growth if you're sitting around waiting on buy-in. I will say that what I found in my work as an instructional coach over time is that positive results lead to buy-in. So my first year in the role of facilitating professional learning communities, like I mentioned, I had a lot of resistance, particularly from veteran teachers who had been at the school for a long time. I was new to the school district, and they were, downright mean, not only resistant, but sometimes downright mean, and were not supportive of the PLC process, were not open to my suggestions or to my leadership. But at the end of that first school year of us using the PLC process, our student achievement results just grew tremendously. We saw such progress in that 1 year of teachers having a focused time every week to come together to talk about effective instructional practices, to look at student work, to analyze student data, and talk in teams about what was working and what wasn't, to share new practices. And all of that work we were doing, we saw that at the end of that first year, we saw that it was working. We were making forward progress as a school, and it felt really good. And once those results were in, the teachers who were some of my biggest resistors at the beginning of the school year came to my office and apologized for how they had treated me earlier in the year. They apologized for their behavior. They apologized for the things they said, for their attitudes. One teacher even came to my office crying. She was very, remorseful about the way she had been earlier in the school year, and it was the results that made the difference. So once you hang in there and you persist, you do what you know is best for students, the results will come, and after everyone sees the positive results, they're going to feel they're going to be more inclined to get on board. So that's where your buy-in is going to happen. In the meantime, while you're waiting for those results and you're waiting for buy-in, one thing that I've read and heard Dr. Dufour talk about, so you may be familiar with the Dufours, who are really big leaders in the PLC movement. One thing Rick Dufour says is that first you have to change actions, and then later the attitudes will change. And that sort of goes back to the idea of buy-in. So it seems counterintuitive to what we think. We think, well, we need to really focus on building culture, and we need to make sure everyone has the right attitude, and we all are, have the right relationships, and we all trust each other. And so that needs to be first. Let's first build trust and the right attitudes. Well, that's actually not going to get you very close to your end results. What you have to do first sometimes, and this is certainly what was the case in my situation, is that you first have to change the actions. So the actions for me were requiring people to attend professional learning community meetings, requiring people to be active participants in those professional learning community meetings, requiring teachers to follow through with things they said they would do, requiring teachers to post their student data, requiring them to bring the requested materials to PLCs. Those are small behaviors, small actions, but we found that we had to really hold teachers to the fire. We had to force them to do these things. Participation in the PLC process was not an option. You couldn't come just because you had the right attitude or because you really wanted to. Everyone had to be at the table regardless of your attitude. Now, at the beginning, not everyone wanted to be at the table. Some people walked in and just plopped down, and it was obvious that they didn't want to be there. But over time, as they saw those results, the attitudes gradually began to change. But at first, you really just have to focus on those actions. What are the behaviors? What are the actions that you expect to see in your teachers? And you just have to mandate that. And that's a place where you are going to need your administrator's support. Because for you as a teacher leader or as a PLC leader, you are probably not in an administrative position, in a position of authority where you can write teachers up or reprimand teachers for not exhibiting the right behaviors. But you need a principal who can be the backbone of that initiative. So you're going to be the support, and you're going to be out there working with your teachers, but you need an administrator who can be the heavy, who can say, yeah, I heard from Jayme that you were in PLCs last week, but you didn't say a word, and you didn't bring the handout that you were expected to bring. You hadn't done the work you were expected to do. This is what we're expecting, and this is going to be reflected in your teacher evaluation. So you need that sort of support. And a little bit later, Dr. Stegall is going to share with you some resources, some ideas you can take back to your administrator. If you're facing the resistance from your administrator, he's going to give you some words that you can share to help your administrator get on board and be that person for you who's going to require those actions that can lead to the right attitudes. I want to talk to you, I want to remind you about an earlier webinar that we had just a couple of months ago that was focused on using web tools to build a personal learning network and using web tools to support and enhance and extend the work of your PLCs. And one thing that was really key for me in my work as a PLC facilitator, one thing I experienced that you likely experienced as well is it can be a really lonely position. When you're the only person in the school with this role, and everyone else in the school has a different role, it can feel really lonely at times, and you don't always have somebody you can go to. So maybe you just had, a PLC. For me, 5th grade was my tough group my first year. They had major attitudes. They didn't trust me. They didn't want to be there. And so at the end of my 5th grade PLC, I just really wanted somebody I could go talk to and vent and say, this is how this went, and I really thought it would go this way, but it went this way, and I'm feeling frustrated, and do you have any ideas? What can I try next time? And for me, one major support for me in those first couple of years was that every Tuesday, all the instructional coaches from across the district came together for an instructional coach meeting. So we basically had our own professional learning community, all of us who were in the same role at different schools. We met on a regular basis every week, and we got to share those stories. We got to vent. We were all experiencing the same sorts of things in our schools, and that was really invaluable time to me. That was a support network that I really desperately needed. I don't know what I would have done without that. So if you are in a situation where you have that, then really take advantage of that time to build that network of support. And if you don't have that, if you're not in a situation where you have that regular support, then find a way to make that. You may have to be the one to reach out to other people who are in other similar roles, but in other schools or districts, and find a way to build a network of support for yourself. I can't encourage you strongly enough to do that, just speaking from my own experience of what a valuable support that was for me. Also, feel free to reach out through web tools. You can build, beyond your local network of colleagues, you can build a global network that can be a support system for you. Twitter was a great space for me to connect with other people who were in similar roles in other places, and they were facing similar challenges, and they had great ideas. They helped me problem solve, and I recommend for you that you do that as well. And so, like we looked at in a couple of months ago, we had that webinar. We shared, Kyle and I shared several different web tools that you can use and ways to use hashtags to find groups of folks to connect with. So there are several hashtags out there that would be great for you to start with. One of them is EduCoach. So it's the hashtag sign and EduCoach, EduCoach. And so that hashtag is used just for people who are educational coaches, instructional coaches. There's also a PLC hashtag, and that's ATPLC, @PLC. It stands for All Things PLC. Those are two hashtags that might help you get connected with other folks who have similar interests and are facing similar challenges. So take some time, maybe this week, to start working on investing in building that network. Another suggestion I have for you in getting support from your teachers and getting support from your administrator is working to extend the PLC. So for me, in my first year as an instructional coach, we really were focusing on how the PLC was, a Thursday meeting. It was 45 minutes on a Thursday. We all came together and we did PLCs. So we had a meeting. The meeting was the PLC, and the rest of the week we were teachers in our own little classrooms and our own little worlds, and we came together once a week for our professional learning communities. But over time, you need to be working toward making the shift away from thinking of the meeting as the PLC and start thinking about the PLC as the group of people. So the meeting is not the PLC. That's just a meeting. The PLC is the group of people in the community. The PLC is the community of people. So if you think about the people as the PLC, then you'll start to see that a PLC is not something that just happens once a week on a Thursday in a specific room in the school. But a PLC is a way of being. It's a way of talking with each other. It's a way of looking at student work. It's a way of collaborating together, and that is something that should permeate the building and permeate the school day and not just be confined to one day or one specific time in one specific location in the school. So I think if you can help your teachers make that shift, it really is just going to require you to focus on your language. Really pay attention to how you use words like PLC. Do you use PLC to refer to the time of day? Do you refer to PLCs as the day of the week or as the meeting? Or are you using PLC to refer to the group of people? And really something as simple as just making that change in language can help teachers start to get more buy-in, because they start to see that, we are the PLC even when we're not in the instructional coach's office. Even when we're not with the PLC leader, we are still a PLC, and we don't need that leader to be with us all the time in order to be and act and do things like a PLC would. So that's one major suggestion, is to try to make that shift in how you use language. And you may already be there. It took me some time to get to that place. And if you're already there, that's great. And maybe you can work on getting your administrator and your colleagues to make that same shift in language. A couple of other things that I initiated as a PLC facilitator to try to get the idea across that we're a PLC all the time and not just on Thursdays when you're in my office. A couple of other things I did. One is that I provided what I called essential questions. There were weekly essential questions I provided those for every grade level team on a weekly basis. And so I have an example of it here on this slide. It was just a little, cut up sheet of paper, like a half sheet of paper, and I would give one to the grade level chair in each grade level every week. And then they were expected to take this half sheet of these essential questions and talk about them in their weekly grade level planning meeting, of which I was not a part. So I was not in their grade level planning meetings. These meetings were happening in their classrooms on a different day of the week. They were happening apart from me. And so my goal in doing this was to try to push the PLC conversations, to push the work we were doing as PLCs away from just this weekly meeting time and get it out into, this is just how when we meet together as a team, this is how we talk. These are the things we work on. These are the things we do together. And it was a really great way for me to keep the conversation going. So within, 45 minutes on a Thursday, we didn't have enough time to talk about everything that needed to be talked about. We didn't have enough time to work on everything that we needed to work on. But by using that additional time, I was able to accomplish a few goals. I was able to push the idea that we are a PLC all the time. And then I was also able to follow up on some important initiatives and ideas and concepts that maybe we wouldn't have time to go into detail about in our weekly meetings. So if we had had a PLC, meeting 3 weeks ago and I wanted to revisit that topic, but I didn't have a lot of meeting time to do that, I could ask teachers to revisit that topic in their grade level planning. And a similar idea would be to also use staff meeting time for PLC type conversations. So perhaps your principal is, the one who's in charge of the staff meeting time and setting the agenda, and maybe you could go to your principal and say, can we have 10 or 15 minutes of the staff meeting time to do PLC type things, to work on things that we would typically work on in our PLC meetings. Just another way to get your teachers to see that that we are a PLC all the time and not just when we're together for this one specific time of week, this one meeting. I pulled some tips for PLC leaders from a couple of resources I want to share with you. One, the citation here is at the bottom of the slide. This was a great resource for me as a new instructional coach, as a PLC leader. It's called Learning by Doing, a handbook for professional learning communities at work. It's by the DeFores and a couple of other folks. And it's a very practical resource. And they listed a few suggestions for folks who lead the PLC process. One is to link the changes you're making to things that are currently happening. So it's something that we do in our classrooms as teachers. We're presenting a new concept and we try to link it to what students already know, to the experiences they've already had, to their prior knowledge. And we need to do the same thing for our teachers. So when we're implementing something new or trying to share a new strategy or a new way of doing things, instead of just saying, here's something, brand new, let's try to connect it to what's already happening. So we're already doing this one thing, and so because we're doing this, we're gonna also do this, or because we think in this way, or we believe these things, then we're going to make this change, or we're going to initiate this new thing. And that can help teachers feel like we're not just adding more things to their plate, but that the choices we're making and the changes we're implementing are actually connected to things we already know and do and believe. Another suggestion from the DeFores is to focus first on the why and then focus on the how. So in just a few minutes, Dr. Stegall is going to share with you a lot about the why. So that may be what you need to share with your administrator after today's webinar is the why. And with teachers, sometimes we need to do that. We need to share, make sure everyone understands the why that we're doing something. Now, like I said earlier, not everyone has to buy in or agree with the why, but make sure everyone knows the why. So you wouldn't stand up at a staff meeting and say, okay, tomorrow we're starting a daily intervention time, and here's all the details you need to know about how to do that. The first thing you would explain is, we have student achievement gaps. We have these differences, and we have these students' needs who aren't being met. So because of that, now we're going to implement this daily intervention time. So in all the conversations you have with teachers and in your work with PLCs, remember to focus first on the why before you focus on the how. A third is a concept that the Dufors refer to as the knowing-doing gap. So this is the idea that we know what's best for students. We know that inquiry-based science, is better than just reading from a textbook and memorizing some vocabulary words and definitions. But we're going to keep doing the textbook thing because that's what's easy and that's what's always been done. So that's called the knowing-doing gap, and that happens a lot in schools. So we need to keep drawing teachers' attention to that. You could even maybe, have a poster hanging in your office that reminds you and your teachers about that. So if we know one thing is best and we continue to do something that's different, then we have a gap there. We need to try to close that gap. And a final piece of advice from this book for folks who lead PLCs is what they call tight and loose leadership. And the idea behind tight and loose leadership is that you have to choose what you're going to be tight on and what you're going to be loose on. So we can't be tight on everything, and we also can't be loose on everything. So we need to make sure that we're tight on the values, on the things that we believe, and the ways that we act as PLCs. But then we can be loose on how we implement that. So every grade level, every department or every group of teachers may be a little different in how they work together as a PLC and how they analyze student data or how they report things out. Those little things can change just based on personalities and preferences of each teacher and each grade level team. But what we need to stay tight on are the core values and the norms we've established as our PLC groups, the ways that we go about being together. And another resource from the Dufors and Eaker is called Professional Learning Communities at Work, Best Practices for Enhancing Student Achievement. This was one of the first, maybe the first book about PLCs from Rick Dufour, sort of the Bible of PLCs. It's a really sort of comprehensive resource for folks who are just getting started with PLCs, and they offer some suggestions for folks leading PLCs, specifically in regards to the role of the administrator. So this might be some information you can take back and share with your administrator if you feel that your administrator is not supportive, maybe in some ways resistant. So the administrator's role is, again, to be tight on the vision and values and loose on the implementation, loose on how. That would be the rules and procedures, the ways we go about doing things. Also, the administrator's role would be to empower teachers through shared decision making. So giving up some of the control and some decision making and letting teachers be teacher leaders and be empowered through shared decision making in the school strategic improvement process, for example. And also the principal, the administrator, should model behavior that's congruent with the school's vision and values. So if the principal expects grade level teams to act in certain ways, then the principal should be modeling that first and foremost. And you as a PLC leader, that's certainly your role as well, is to model the behavior that you expect to see in your teachers. And they offer 2 pitfalls to avoid for administrators and PLC leaders. And one pitfall would be paying too much attention to the resistors or even vilifying them, really focusing your energy and attention on maybe these 2 or 3 teachers who you feel like are out to get you, or they're out to sabotage the PLC process, or they just refuse to be part of it. Instead of focusing your attention and your time and your energy on those folks, focus on those teacher leaders, focus on those people who can be your allies, and just trust that in time those resistors are either going to get on board or they're going to go somewhere else and be part of another group of folks. So don't pay too much attention to them. You keep persisting and doing what you know is best for students, and focus on your allies and your supporters. And the final reminder, I'll mention this again, one of their pitfalls was focusing on attitudes instead of behaviors. So again, focus on changing actions first, and the attitudes will come. So now Dr. Stegall is going to share with you the why administrators should care, and these will be some words of wisdom you can take back to your administrator following today's webinar.
Well, good evening, everyone. I don't know about words of wisdom. A lot of this has come through trial and error. Obviously, the process, I encourage you to continue moving forward with the process. It's made a difference in our district, and I certainly think it's tried and true, and it's good core values to hold on to. But as when someone asks me why does it matter, or why should an administrator care about PLCs, the first thing I always think of is what impact, if I'm a school leader, what impact does it have on the climate and how will it help me be a better leader. And the first thing I think it's easy to go to is, some of you might not know that 50% of all teachers leave the profession in the first 5 years. If you think about that, how much that turnover rate impacts you as a school. And on top of that, this past year, 2014, 20% of all educators left the field, and that's up from 9% just in 2009. So it's becoming even more so. The Department of Ed lists these 5 reasons that former educators left the profession, and things that they received in their new profession that was non-education based, and that they felt provided them, did a better job of providing for them than the education job did. And as you look at those, opportunities to learn from colleagues, which is a big part of professional learning communities. Professional development, a big part of professional learning communities. Support from your managers. Being in your principal or your school leader, being in those PLCs shows them as the instructional leader and gives them a lot of credibility, but it also shows teachers that they support the efforts that are being made. It can easily be accomplished through PLCs. Professional advancement, and the last one, influence of workplace practices. A lot of what happens in our PLCs is discussing pedagogy. What's successful with our students, and how do we know? What data have we collected? And it helps teachers influence, well, I've been doing this for a while and I've had success with students. You have similar students to mine. I think this might impact you, shadowing one another, giving feedback to one another. So all of these, if for nothing else than trying to keep the turnstile happening in your school and building on the people that are in your building, it would seem that PLCs would help to stem some of that. Obviously, to me, less turnover means you have more stability. If you're implementing programs or approaches or strategies, there's a likelihood for a greater fidelity of implementation if you have people that are there for longer periods of time to see it through and monitor for improvement on that. On top of that, thousands of dollars. Think of how much it goes into recruiting and hiring and training teachers and educators. And when you have that person leave, you in a lot of ways have to start over. Even if they have the same degree, every school building in every district has its own unique climate and focuses. There's a lot of time and effort spent in training those people and getting them caught up and recruiting those people. Across the U.S., in fact, attrition costs about $2.2 billion annually in the teaching profession, which is quite significant. Number 2, why should an administrator care? Well, PLCs, in my opinion, have a tremendous impact on mindsets. Some of you probably know Carol Dweck's work on fixed and growth mindsets. And essentially, a fixed mindset is saying that it's taking the victim mentality and saying that, you know what, the reason I'm not having success with my students is because they come from this type of home life, or these students don't have the same parent support, or I don't have the newest textbooks, or we don't have enough technology. It looks for excuses as why a teacher or a school may not be having success. What we try to incorporate in our PLCs and what our administrators start to see through PLCs is teachers start looking at things differently. When a teacher sits and goes through planning in a PLC and works with their instructional coach, they start to see, you know what, there's 5 of us in our grade level, and this teacher over here has had tremendous success on our quarterly evaluations or on our student assessments. She's got the same kind of students that I have. Her students have the same background as mine do. They have the same poverty levels and all similar factors. And over time, they start taking this vicarious approach to teaching and learning, saying, you know, and I'm sure a lot of people look at me and say, if that guy can be a superintendent, then anybody could be a super. I could do that. Well, teachers take on that mentality. You know what? My colleague, who I know very well, if she can get these results, it's not like she has some bionic equipped mind that I don't have. I think I could do that. I could get the same results from my students. And they start looking at things from a growth mindset. They look at the outside factors not as excuses but as challenges. And they start building on the capacity from their colleagues. You know what? Jayme has done this for a while. She's done really well. If she's done it, I'm sure that I could figure a way to reach my students. So teachers start taking on that vicarious approach to teaching and learning. And really what it comes down to, they start to see that given access to someone else's learning experiences, they realize that they can replicate it themselves. Another thing that growth mindset does, it improves teacher efficacy. What it does is they start seeing themselves differently. They start less of the doubting their own capabilities and less doubting of the fact, Jayme talked about, once you get results, people have buy-in, they start believing the results are there. As a district, we're very diverse, and we were very low functioning when I moved to this district several years ago, and we heard a lot of reasons why. From the industry, the job industry had left, and we had a higher level of poverty. A lot of our affluence had gone. We had facilities that were outdated. There was a lot of reasons, and we had teachers who didn't believe we could get the results, and they started saying, well, I certainly could do it if I had the kids we used to have. Once we started changing our mindset and focusing through PLCs on sharing, what, we all have strengths, start sharing our strengths and learning from one another and shadowing one another and sharing resources and talking about pedagogy instead of about field trips, we started seeing results, and the buy-in, teachers started viewing themselves differently. Their self-efficacy started to rise. You could see that they had belief in their own capabilities of reaching any and all children. So as an administrator, I would love to have teachers who took it on as a challenge instead of taking the victim mentality and took it as an approach of, this is an opportunity for us to improve and to show tremendous growth with our students. So that's a great benefit of PLCs. A third benefit that an administrator may see, I really call it return on investment, and I talked a little bit about it just a moment ago. Think about collective capacity. In most school buildings, you have an expert in literacy. You have an expert in math. You have someone who's great with classroom management. You have someone who's an innovative thinker and can think outside the box and plan things in a unique way that others may not see. You have someone that's really strong in technology. And some of these people may have duplicate strengths. But rarely does everyone have high-level strengths in all of those areas. And by working together and sharing ideas and training one another essentially and sharing resources and sharing strategies and discussing teaching practices and strategies, teachers build a collective capacity. They not only have their own strengths, but they take on the strengths of those in their PLC and in their school who they learn from. It's the same way you'll see in sports a lot. A team will go from being an average team to excelling, and all of a sudden players who had just been marginal become much better players because those around them. You hear Michael Jordan a lot. He would bring out the strengths in others. It wasn't that he got the best players around. They took from his strengths, his work ethic, his capabilities, and learned from them and added to their own repertoire, and they became better athletes and better. They looked at the game differently and played the game differently. Well, teachers are no different. They learn from one another, and they learn strategies that work for their peers and incorporate in their own toolbox of strategies. There is also, when you talk about return on investment, the compounding impact. If I send most of you, if you're like we are, you have limited resources for professional development. What we try to do is when we send a person or a group to a training or staff development, they come back and they share their new learning with their peers. And it's not just about sharing to check off that they told someone what they learned about. They then put a now what. Jayme talked about the how. The what is what we're going to do PLCs, but the how is, all right, how can we implement this? And how are we going to make sure it's successful? And how do we know we're having good results? So instead of just going to a workshop and then possibly implementing part of it, they bring it back and share with their colleagues and get feedback, and they brainstorm and make they mind map out what this might look like if they implement it, what resources are needed, and they'll go observe one another and provide suggestions. And over time you see, and the research has shown that over time there's a higher capability or a higher likelihood that those new strategies will be used not only by the person who attended the original training, but by their peers as well. So you get the impact and the benefit of those who were trained, but when they leave the building, you don't lose that expertise, because by sharing with one another in PLCs and giving feedback and providing suggestions, you've been able to use that new learning to improve teachers throughout the grade level or throughout the PLC. One of the things that I struggled with is, as an administrator and even looking back as a teacher, I remember getting trained on, on guided reading, for example, or getting trained in a certain area, and when I left the school to go to a new job, I used to think, wow, they put a lot of money in sending me to that, and now I'm not there for them to get the benefit of it. Well, a PLC kind of mitigates part of that. you're getting the benefit of the person that attended the training, but they're sharing those resources and those ideas, allows you to have that collective capacity and the culture that outlasts them, and it's not dependent on the specific leader or the specific teachers in the school who received the original training. A third benefit as administrators you might share is the growth through coaching. Atul Gawande, he writes for the New Yorker. He's a surgeon. I go to this a lot. It's very powerful. I think he wrote a book called The Checklist Manifesto, but really he wrote an article about coaching and about, as a high-level surgeon, how he knew that across the board, surgeons across the U.S. make mistakes. They're not perfect. But when they started getting coaching from a colleague, not only did they have greater results, they ended up learning ways of doing some of their surgeries that not only eliminated the mistakes they made, but prevented even the likelihood of it, even little things about how they approach, what tools they used and how they approached the incision. And it was about him being a surgeon, but he did share how that carries over into other professions. And he mentions Jim Knight from the University of Kansas, who does a lot of work with instructional coaching. What had been the case when I first came into education was when you had a teacher who was teaching reading or teaching any content, essentially what you came up against was, well, this is how I learned to teach reading when I graduated in 1984 or 1973 or whatever year they happened to come out of college, which is nothing wrong with that. But as you and I know, through time and through research and through data studies, we learn new strategies that work with certain types of students and with certain types of situations and with greater likelihoods than other strategies. It's not all strategies are equal. So coaching and sharing in PLCs allows teachers to continually look at the most up-to-date strategies. And I go back to this all the time. Imagine if you had, and I think I'll mention this in just a moment, we'll talk about education malpractice. I won't get into it too much. But the coaching allows even the best of the best to get feedback. LeBron James, as most of you know, is one of the top athletes in basketball in history. And he changed from Cleveland to go to Miami, not only to join up with a couple of his buddies, but because of the coaching that he hopes to get. And they won championships. He moved to a new team this year, back to Cleveland, with elite athletes and handpicked his players just like he did in Miami. And they're below 500. And the discussions aren't about LeBron, they're about his coaching. Even the most elite athletes can improve through feedback and through someone giving them input and helping them see things that they don't sometimes see in themselves. We all become, almost get tunnel vision because we're used to our own strengths, and you can sometimes lose some self-awareness. So coaching is how some of the best athletes, Maxwell Perkins worked for Scribner. He was an editor. F. Scott Fitzgerald, he nurtured him, and Ernest Hemingway and Thomas Wolfe, best writers in the world. They received coaching throughout their career. So even the best of the best in their fields, athletes, musicians, writers, can improve and do improve through coaching. I talked about it just a moment ago. Imagine going to the doctor right now and you have an appendicitis that's swollen, and your doctor says, all right, when I came out of med school in 1972, we learned how to create a 14-inch incision across the abdomen to remove your appendix. You would say, no way. We know that laparoscopy is a safer way of doing that same procedure, less side effects, less scarring. In many ways, it's almost a 24-hour turnaround before you can leave. You would never let a doctor use a practice that was outdated or less effective. LASIK eye surgery, they used to put blade to eye when you had corrective vision, and there was chance of infection. There was chance that you could lose sight, and the recovery was much longer, and the percentage of increase in your vision was minimal. LASIK, you sit down in a chair, the laser goes over your eye, you're in and out with 20/20 vision within a few hours. You would never let a doctor lay a blade to your eye now because you would consider that malpractice. But when we as educators know that there's effective strategies or practices that are better or more likely to receive the results that we want from students, if an educator chooses not to use those, that's education malpractice. And I hate to think that a teacher, and I hear this even with my own children, you hear on the ball field, I hope my kid gets so-and-so. As a teacher, she's such a great teacher. And in a lot of ways, you hear that referred to as education roulette. We shouldn't have the quality of education that a child gets be dependent on the teacher they get. We should, our PLCs, and what we try to do is use our professional learning communities to ensure that every teacher has a quality repertoire of resources and strategies that we know are research-based, and we give feedback, and we shadow, and we discuss, and we track our own data, and we have comparative data, so we know. We don't leave it to chance. We should never allow a student's likelihood of getting a quality education to the luck of which teacher they happen to get that year. So professional learning communities allow us to make sure that we're not practicing education roulette and education malpractice. We're ensuring that all teachers have training and understand that, yes, children are still children, but their learning styles have changed, and in many ways the outside factors that can influence their ability to learn and their ability to pay attention and their home environments have changed over time, and expectations have changed both in the state and federal levels on what's expected of a student compared to what it was 20 and 30 years prior. So we can't leave it to individuals. And I say this all the time, but people hate to hear it. Teachers are not independent contractors. They work for the school or the district. We don't hire teachers to lay their skills on a student and hope that it takes and they have quality results and the student does well in life. We look as a functioning team and as a group that we're going to make sure that we do everything possible to not let that kid fall through the crack. And that means holding each other accountable and sharing out ideas and resources and helping each other grow and building a collective capacity. So those are a few things as an administrator. Whether an administrator has been trained specifically in professional learning communities, I know most principals want to make sure they hang on to their best teachers. They don't want the turnover rate. They want to make sure their teachers are using strategies that will get quality results. They want teachers who look at challenges as an opportunity, not as through a victim mentality. And they want to get a high return on their investment when they get training. So these are all areas that, as an administrator, it's hard to argue why would not be quality and why would not be worth using this approach to improve practices in the school.
Okay, Kyle, we're going to turn it back over to you now for Q&A.
Excellent. Thank you very much. That was an excellent presentation. We do have a few minutes for questions and answers, up to about 10 minutes. Participants, if you could please submit questions through the webinar software's toolbar. We will respond to them as time will allow. We do actually already have several. One question is, we have several programs that have been implemented in the last couple of years, and these teachers have to assess students every 5, 10, or 20 days, and it's made it really stressful for teachers, and it's difficult for them to actually have time to teach. The PLCs are much more productive at this person's school this year, but do you have any suggestions?
Yeah, I think the PLC process would actually be really helpful in this situation, particularly if you use that time for collaborative planning, for example. Maybe not every time you meet, but maybe every second or third or fourth time you meet, use that time just for collaborative planning, for teachers just to sit down and actually plan together. That's not something that happens very often, but I think that can be one of the most valuable ways we use our PLC time, is to leave the PLC with a unit plan or with a few really solid lessons planned while we're together, and that frees up teachers to have more time later and less time planning outside of the PLC.
And one of the things, we have a similar issue with state requirements on the one-on-one testing with students and assessing students very often, and what we've tried to focus on is the results of the testing, how we're using that to drive instruction, and that's what the conversations are about in PLCs. And I know every district's differently, but we've made it a priority to free up the teacher to be in front of the students with instruction as much as possible. So we utilize teacher assistants where it's allowed and train people to do the assessing, and then the teachers can work together to analyze the data, to use it to drive the new instructional strategies, to determine what worked. And so the conversations are using that data that they've done and not letting it overwhelm them. It can become overwhelming if you just get caught up in the time that you're putting into it. But we look at it as a roadmap for which direction we should be going in, or to validate what we've already done, to make sure that we know that it's working and that we're doing the right thing. So trying as much as possible to utilize that data and keep the conversations around the results and the next steps, hopefully will mitigate some of those stressors that come along with the testing process.
Thank you. Another question: if there's a school or district that is that is extremely focused on learning standards and that is a very strong motivator for any changes in teaching practice, what if, for instance, there's a teacher that does well as measured by those standards? How do you convince that person that the best professionals continuously improve throughout their career?
We hear that sometimes. We've had, when we started PLCs here, we started in 2007, and we had some people say, I get good results. Why do I need to sit in on a PLC? And I've taken this from made several points. One, are 100% of your students on grade level in all areas, and are you reaching every type of at-risk kid? And I've never met a student that has every kid that makes growth in his own grade level all the time in every area. And two, we have a lot to learn from. The other teachers have a lot to learn from you, from your expertise and what you've done. You're part of a team. Again, it goes back to my comment. You're not an independent contractor. We don't hire you to work just with these students and just come and go as you please and do what you feel like is most appropriate in your. We want your educational experience and we want your expertise, but we want it to improve the entire organization. And it's not about us as individuals. It's about the students. So if we're about improving instruction for individual students, then we need your expertise. We need your feedback. But capitalizing on their strengths and helping them. A lot of those teachers, we let lead workshops and lead trainings and we let others come in and observe them. And you see that a lot of times they find through feedback and discussion that they do have room to grow and that they can help others and they can mentor others. So trying to capitalize on their strengths and help them know that it's not about you as an adult. I care very little about whether everyone's happy as an adult 100% all the time, because if we're pushing forward and doing what's right, it's going to make people uncomfortable. But the results are about what's right for students. And if we're all committed to those students, then you're going to want to be a part of this team and you're going to want to help your peers grow. So that's the approach I think is probably the first step in taking to this. Learning by doing talks a lot about it as well.
I echo what Dr. Stegall said about making sure that those teachers have a way to plug in as teacher leaders. So they certainly, if they're really, quality teachers, they're very effective in their classrooms, they certainly need to be helping to lead other teachers. They need to be contributing to PLC conversations, a very active contributor. And sometimes, sometimes in my experience, those teachers can be really the ones who resist the process the most because they feel like they've been effective without that. So why do they need that? And in my first year, those were the teachers who gave me, the hardest time, were the ones who had gotten good results in the past and just didn't feel like they needed to be part of PLC. So, in your meetings with PLCs, I would just encourage those folks to share, even, put them on the spot. I know you're an expert at this, or I've seen you do this with your students. I know this worked really well. Can you please share with us how you do that? Or ask them, next time we meet together, I'd like for you to bring an example of how you've done that in the past. So give them some way to follow through and support their colleagues.
And we've had those teachers lead strategy sessions or create strategy boards and kind of again, to be in that teacher leader role. We find a lot of times teachers like that empowerment of being able to share their expertise. So we try to provide opportunities for them to lead discussions and lead others in their school and take on more of a mentor role.
Thank you. We just had a great question. One person is trying to PLC of teachers from many schools who teach the same subject rather than just the same grade level within the district. All the school administrators aren't necessarily supportive of that, but the teachers see that as a useful practice because some teachers are the only ones at their school in very rural areas that are teaching these subject areas. And this person wonders how they could get more school-based support.
Yeah, that's a really great question. We actually had that very same issue. When I was staff development coordinator for this school district, I saw this need in some of our arts teachers. So we had small schools. We had one music teacher that was shared with all 3 elementary schools. We had one art teacher that was shared with the elementary schools. We had one of each of the teachers at the middle school, one at the high school. And so those teachers were not able to plug into the PLC process like our regular classroom teachers were, because they were the lone rangers in their schools, or sometimes even the only one in the entire district who did what they did. So what we did is I reached out to local school districts who were also sort of rural and would have had a similar need. And we started having regional professional learning community meetings with all arts teachers. So we invited arts teachers, I think, from 14 different school districts in the region. And we met quarterly at a central location. And so I set the agenda for those, but I was not an arts educator, so that was not my background, but I just set some structure in terms of we had new curricular standards at the time, so just digging into the content standards and having conversations with like-minded folks who were in similar roles. So all I did was set up the time and the space for the meeting to happen, and then give a little bit of structure to what we should be talking about. Obviously, I got input from the teachers who were participating. And we had pretty good attendance at those. Folks came from an hour and a half away just to be part of a 1-hour PLC meeting, because they just were desperate for that kind of collaboration. They had not had that support, and they were desperate for it. And I'll tell you, I didn't even try to get school-based support in that case. My goal was to get support to the teachers who needed it, to give them a regular time to meet with other folks who were in similar roles. They were so hungry for that they just flocked to it. And when I left that role, I don't think that continued. But I would say I would worry less about getting school support. Their administrators don't necessarily need to be 100% supportive of that. I think it's just more about providing that time and that space and getting the support out to the teachers.
But I will tell you that as these teachers learn from one another, I think sharing back with administrators, unfortunately administrators can get caught up in the day-to-day minutia of the job of leading and all the thousands of different things that come at them from every angle. I think it's important to share the new learning and how it's improved practices. Administrators, results speak to them, and so I would encourage those that are involved with this multi-district PLC to share back some of their new learning and share how it's improved instructional practices or programs. If it's in the arts, we connected arts, and our band programs and our drama programs are sharing across schools and across districts some of their sets from different productions and saving the school money. So even if something as simple as, hey, we made money off of this, we did well by reducing our cost, and we've made a connection now for future programs. I think the results of those kind of discussions will help to develop buy-in. But like Jayme said, it's not about you're not going to get them to all be in favor of everything that happens. They do typically enjoy seeing the results come back.
Thank you. And we actually had a related question. If you have any advice for practical ways to share successes with administration.
Yeah, one of the things we do in this district, we have daily time at every staff meeting, and we had to encourage our principals to take part in this, and it's really grown. We've done it in both technology strategies and in when Jayme was an instructional coach with PLCs, where teachers at staff meetings take a 5-minute share out and just share out a new strategy or a new learning or an aha moment or a success, and we applauded them, and we shared, we built each other up and supported each other, and it seems almost therapeutic, but it was. It allowed us to highlight some of these successes, and they weren't all successes. Sometimes someone would get up and say, this is what I was dealing with, and I'm making progress, and someone would say, well, see me after the meeting, I got some ideas that might help you, and it humanizes the issues we're dealing with, and it connects people to one another. So I think anytime you can offer up an opportunity to share out some of their successes in a whole group, or even video some of the PLC success share outs and share those with one another through video share out, building on each other and supporting each other really helps. It'll help drive this going forward and help sustain it, where when some of you are moving on to better and bigger jobs, you don't have to worry about it falling to the wayside. You know it can continue if you develop that climate in the school.
You can also use some online collaborative spaces for that sharing to happen. So when I was an instructional coach, I created a wiki for our school, and each grade level had their own page on the wiki, and they could use that page to collaborate, to brainstorm, to share resources. And then that was a place, a site I could pull up when I wanted to show my principal something that a grade level team had been working on. I could just go to that grade level page on the wiki and share that, or share with the superintendent, share it at school board, share with other grade levels. So a common online collaborative space can be a good way to do that as well.
And they shared it across schools. We would have one school saying, I hear that South Newton's getting great results. What are they doing? And they would pull up their wiki space at another school and say, wow, look at this strategy. Look at what they've created here, or this product, or this recorded video that they've made. They would start sharing ideas across schools and visiting each other across schools. It became a district-wide PLC. It really wasn't about the title of PLC. It was about growing and developing one another, and there was a little bit of competition, but it was really healthy competition to push each other to do better. So even sharing across schools is a great way to do that through some of these online platforms.
Thank you. And unfortunately, we're out of time for this webinar, so we'll need to wrap things up. Thank you, everyone, for attending and participating. I also want to give a big thanks to Jayme and David for such an excellent presentation and sharing their passion and expertise with us. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kyle.
And again, this webinar has been recorded and will be made available on our website. Our next webinar will be on our upcoming PLC forum and will take place on Thursday evening, March 5th. Please look out for our monthly update emails to PLC leaders, as well as further information on the PLC Leaders website. We also encourage you to continue the discussion on our Google Communities page for Laser Eye Through PLCs. I will be posting some follow-up with the hashtags that Jayme and David mentioned, EduCoach and ATPLC. I'll also post some links to the checklist manifesto and learning by doing and some of those resources they mentioned. Finally, when you exit this webinar, you'll be directed to a very short survey. We greatly appreciate your feedback, and you're taking a small amount of time to respond to those couple questions. If for some reason it does not pop up when you exit the webinar, it will also be included in the follow-up email that will be sent by GoToWebinar tomorrow evening. Thank you again for attending. Have a great evening. Good night.